All right, so we are back at the Cracks in Postmodernity. Today we have Catherine Liu, who is a professor of film and media studies at UC Irvine, also the director of the Palm Springs School for Social Research, and the author of this recent book, Traumatized: The New Politics of Public Suffering, which I was just telling Catherine I could not put down. I found it to be fascinating, but more importantly, helpful on a personal level, on many levels. So let's just start by, talking about what inspired you to write this book and what exactly were you trying to accomplish by writing it?
Um, I'm interested in the intellectual history of liberalism and where things went wrong with liberalism. And a lot of my experience within this book is about maybe like 30, 40 years of experience in academia from the time that I was an undergraduate to the time now when I'm a professor about to retire from it's not official yet, from a
Okay.
profession that I've given I'd say 3 decades of my life too.
Wow.
And I have seen that there's some things that never change within this academic world and its discourse and the promises of the post 68 post social movements left were all betrayed one by one. And this book was really about a kind of a trying to understand how the ideology of liberalism hardened and moved away from economic issues and the issues that plague the working class and wage workers in America to be entirely focused on um, affectual issues, cultural issues, social issues, in which it has taken liberalism and leftism more and more extreme positions that are further and further divorced from the experiences of everyday people. Because what I found most compelling about both Freud and Marx when I was first introduced to them, their work was how deeply they spoke to the experiences of working for pitiful wages, the class struggle with regard to history and the emancipation of the great majority of people from enslavement, tutelage, chattel slavery, all sorts of domination and coercion in like perfectly Marxist terms. And then, um, you know, how I just saw the sort of academic trends within what we would call identity politics, or to say wokeness, moving towards a more and more hardened ideological lines on identity, personal experience, and everything, and things like that. And so, um, it especially was disturbing to me because not only was um, multiculturalism and feminism very new and fresh when I was coming up in the world, I could see that the direction was wrong. One of the things that I noticed when I was younger was how minority figures, women of color, people of color, took their own personal success as a sign of institutional progress. And I
Mm.
was always like, this just doesn't seem right. And there was a lot of there was a huge gay movement that came out of the AIDS crisis and also Stonewall. And I was at City University of New York when I think it was called the Gay and Lesbian Studies Center. It's now, something much more, expansive in terms of all the
Mhm.
different sexualities and genders or inclusive, when they got a huge grant from um, I forget who it was, very, very big guy in theater. And the whole conference was about celebrating gay academics and how gay academics had moved into the institution. I was really young at the time, and I was thinking, like, so this is we don't transform the institution. We don't actually ask what's going on with regard to knowledge production. We
Mhm.
just keep adding more identities that strengthens the institution, legitimizes the institution. And, I had been sort of just young enough or just old enough or just politically aware enough to see that the promises of, the 70s with regard to like revolution and the kind of revolutionary change in the world were completely given up for these kinds of representational, uh,
Hmm.
purely representational moves within the professional classes. And also, like, this was also the time of raising awareness
Yes.
as NGO culture. It didn't just come out of anywhere. And I was like, what does that actually mean? Raising awareness of prostate cancer, breast cancer, refugee status. It's the whole question of raising awareness, like substitutes for political agitation or political education. And the other thing that I'm realizing is that I got that your generation did not get was just basic education in ideological analysis. Like
Hmm.
we had like basic advertising analysis courses in communications or even in high school. They'd be like,
Hmm.
look at this ad for liquor. What is it trying to do
Yeah.
here? It's trying to show you that it's really glamorous and that you'll be sexually fulfilled. What are the actual effects of alcohol? How is this bottle being shown in this very phallic way? Like basic ideology critique was part of everyday education in 70s New York City public schools and early on at Yale when I was an undergrad. This is gone. And I blame identity politics
But
and
you know what, to
kind of
your point though, the
reactionary.
the only kind of like advertising analysis I was taught was to like read toxic masculinity or like white supremacy into ads, but that's basically it.
But not capitalism. Like they would
No.
literally, there
No.
was one ad I remember, Judith Williamson had a great book about analyzing ads, and it was about like this maybe it was a car ad. It was on a jetty, and the car was at the end of the jetty, and it was like, look at this jetty jutting into the water with the
Hmm.
Porsche at the end. I remember a lot of stuff that we were basically being told taught how to like take apart this endless world of marketing, and all of that disappeared, so that all of
Hmm.
your generation is about like critical identity politics,
Yeah.
critical race theory, when this is actually part of propaganda and ideology and marketing. And there was a lot of like anti-propaganda ideological analysis that was still, that to me is such an important part of leftism that was completely abandoned. And we were all told, and especially your generation, it's a failure of my generation in terms of teaching properly, but that it's all about like being recognized, being validated, self-affirmation, the personal is the political. Um, I actually really wanted to call the book How the Traumatized, How the Personal Consumed the Political. I think
Hmm.
the Verso marketing people are better, but I had this
Yeah.
image of like Ms. Pac-Man, just like eating
Hmm.
politics. So
Interesting.
that's a very long excuse for
Yeah.
I want to do basic ideology critique about a
But
phenomenon that I think
mm,
subtends identity politics and wokeness. Like precedes it, will probably survive beyond it, and it has to do with a completely marketizable, human resources oriented notion of inner life and outer life that has been
mhm,
imposed
mhm.
upon the American polity and increasingly exported to the rest of the world since 1985. That's 86, since the end of the Cold War.
But it's also interesting because you were saying before that you weren't so much aiming to kind of like preach at people or talk at them, but you were trying to give readers a language to articulate what they already know to be happening, which to me is super important because I look at how much my generation is very susceptible to, I guess, regurgitating these very mimetic scripts. So like I see a TikTok that talks about microaggressions or intersectionality. And because, as you said, like we haven't really been taught to critically analyze these types of narratives, compounded with like this puritanical moral anxiety. It's like, oh, the good people are saying this, therefore I have to regurgitate the script, or else I'm on the bad side even though we know the script is kind of bullshit and that there's much more going on beneath the surface. So I feel like books like this are really helpful because it's like, okay, let's step back from these very simplistic narratives and look at what's actually happening. Like, let me give you the tools to articulate, again, what's happening on a more nuanced level beyond the like, these very simplistic tropes.
or even a more historical level, like
Yeah.
because all of that, all of those cliches just flatten it out. Another person who like is academic and theoretical that continues to be extremely popular, who I think doesn't really contribute to the general intellect, would be someone like Slavoj Žižek, who's like, yes, the obscene superego of capitalism tells you to
Yeah.
enjoy. He's been saying these things like for 40 years now.
Yeah.
And I'm just amazed by how people are just like, yes, the obscene superego of capitalism tells of the patriarchy tells us to enjoy. He's the obscene father. I'm like, okay, and now what? You've been saying
Yeah.
this since the 80s, and what's the next step? The next step is not even like I don't even feel like there's like a translation now from proper thought to proper action because the political situation is so stymied. But what I would like to do is strengthen people's like sense of like innate integrity when they're being
Hmm.
lied to and
Yes.
strengthen people's critical faculties so that you ask more of
Yeah.
every single institution you're involved in. I just can't believe how resigned my students are to the streams of bullshit that come out of the university, communications departments, marketing departments, so that when they come into my classroom, it's like I'm speaking a different language. Listen to this language. It's so different from everything else you've been cocooned into believing. But getting back to the history thing, I really wanted to look at, like, dig through the origins of what I call trauma culture, like
Yeah.
a trauma script. And one part of that is trauma studies in the university.
Hmm.
Another part of that is the emergence of a kind of pseudo-therapeutic media empire that is governed by Oprah Winfrey. And I
Yes.
remember in like the 1990s when I first got my job and I was at in a comparative literature cultural studies department and I had like one of these cultural studies senior professors. We were talking about him and I was just talking about something that happened on Oprah. I think it might have been like one of the fake memoirs, like James Fry's Million Little Pieces,
Yeah.
which has been exposed. Or maybe it was before that. I don't even know. I was just like kind of complaining about Oprah. And he goes, Catherine, I wouldn't go there. You can't criticize Oprah. And I was just like, oh, wow, I've been given an order not to
Mm.
criticize Oprah
Yeah.
Winfrey. Of course, he's a white guy, so he's like
Yeah. Of
giving me,
course.
telling me what to do, what's proper. And I didn't have tenure and I was like scared off this, but it never left me. I was like, oh my God, I've been given a fucking order not to
Yeah.
go somewhere in
Yeah.
popular culture. And that was also the time when there were like 20 books being written about Madonna at any given moment, that all these like, powerful women in media were these feminist figures, blah, blah, blah. I mean, Oprah herself always stayed away from feminism, but, empowering figures. Let's just say
Yes.
the female empowering
Mm.
figure.
But in addition to Oprah, I mean, you open the book with this AOC. I mean, I think it was what her Instagram live stream after the January 6th thing.
Yep. Yep.
And you're saying, I mean, essentially she's this democratic socialist politician, but who's kind of caving into the whole trauma script.
I
Expose.
didn't even know she was going to cave in. I didn't,
You
I was
didn't.
like so naive at that point. I was just like, she's going to give us this political analysis of what actually happened on January
Oh,
6th that day. It was like February 2021.
I didn't expect much more from her, honestly,
You
but.
didn't expect. See,
No,
I was
because
more
I
convicted.
recognize her right away. She's like the archetypal narcissistic millennial who I don't think she even knows that much about. I don't think she could offer that kind of political analysis. I don't know. Maybe that's mean, but
No, I think you probably recognized her more as a peer, and I was just like, oh, look at this
yeah,
smart young woman. I was trying to like be hopeful, but also like somewhat maternal, and I ended up
fair.
having like this maternal feeling. Like when she started talking about her sexual assault, I was like, don't go there, don't go there, and she just,
Well, but it's true. Like I recognize her as one of my own, she's
yeah,
the millennial who, I can attest from experience. We were trained to use our personal suffering as a form of social and professional currency. And I mean, I want to get into more like why I related to the book on a personal level because it's like I started undergrad 2010. So that was like early proto woke kind of era where, that was the first time I was introduced to, microaggressions and check your privilege at the door and the intersectionality stuff. And
Where did you go to school?
I went to Fordham in New York,
Hmm.
Manhattan.
Hmm.
So, what I remember back in that time was like I thought of myself, I'm fairly progressive. I'm on the right side of history. I don't like racism. I don't like sexism. But when they hit you with, again, it's had like this very puritanical fervor that like not only must you be an ally, but you must like really prove your purity. Like you need to say all the things. You need to check your privilege at the door. I remember having this knee-jerk reaction of like, wait, something isn't really rational here. And something that I observed, over the 4 years of undergrad is that the people who were clamoring most about all the woke pieties, were people who, yeah, maybe had some shit in their lives, maybe had some experiences of sexism, racism, sexual abuse, whatever. Um, but I would meet people who had really tough lives. Like I'll always remember one of my closest friends in undergrad was a Black American girl who went to, I guess it was like a fundamentalist Christian high school where they were like actually racist and told her like the Bible says Black people are inferior. So she had to deal with real shit, and she never like did the woke thing. She never kind of took up those scripts. On one hand, because like she actually was a religious person. She's like, I believe that you have to forgive your enemies, not just because God said so, but because like it's not going to help me to be resentful. So it was always weird to me that someone like her, or I think of another girl who she was Chinese but grew up in India, had to deal with a lot of prejudice, came over to the US, poverty, sexual abuse, all kinds of stuff, but she never boo-hooed. Like she just got straight to work. She's like, why am I going to waste my time complaining? So I was always like, why is it that the people who went through, some stuff were the loudest about, complaining about their trauma when people who are deeply traumatized are like, I don't have time to sit here and wallow. I got work to do. I gotta get over it. The world's fucked up. People are unjust. I gotta do what I gotta do.
Do you know
Um,
what? One of the things I think is really fundamental in learning about this kind of stuff is that when you've been through like serious, programmatic, prolonged, traumatic experiences, what you crave with other people is some kind of detachment, some kind of protection from the
mm,
irrationality and the black hole of those kinds of isolating
mm,
deeply, deeply damaging experiences. And I thought that that's what the university was going to provide. But the university rationalizes suffering now and tells you you've got to repackage your personal experiences in order to translate them into some kind of social capital. And
mhm,
and this is something that working class people who don't go to university have no contact with. And one of the other things that the university education teaches you around is that in order to be socially mobile, because we are in a university and we're all going to lift you out of poverty and put you into the white collar classes, is you've got to participate in this culture. And I think the people who have the most resistance against this kind of script are often people who've really suffered, but also I think there are people who live in a universe where suffering has a very different meaning from the meaning it has in the secular professional managerial classes.
mhm,
Like your friend who grew up in that fundamentalist, racist church, her suffering is and her sacrifice of her personal well-being is always framed within a religious eschatology where
mm,
forgiveness is really important, but also suffering itself is not something you overcome. It's something that you don't make it your identity. It brings you
mhm.
closer to like the sacrifices of Christ or
Yeah.
or the suffering of the martyrs and the saints. And there you have if they're Catholic, but there you have like a system of meaning in the world that
Hmm.
anchors her identity. I really feel like the trauma script and the trauma culture really is about these deracinated media consumer types who go to college and then are like, I don't know who I am. I need distinction. I want to be on the right side of history. And so I'm going to say these things, like say all the things, because I need to belong. The belonging, though, is so fragile. And of course, it creates a lot of anxiety because the rules are constantly changing. And I think among your generation, the most powerful ideological um, coercive force is actually peer approval. So if you're in a
Hmm.
progressive space, like you're just always looking over your shoulder, because by 2010 already, there were all of these like questions of doing the wrong thing and being excommunicated.
Hmm.
You could also say like um, there's like a horrific economic crisis that just happened. $1 trillion of wealth was wiped off the face of America, right? Because of the 2008, 2009 financial crisis. It's really great to keep everyone distracted
Yes.
from a universal experience of the fraudulent nature of our most respected financial institutions, and then start focusing on, like, if I were planning this from like CIA headquarters, I could not have planned it better. Like, let's just go in COINTELPRO, disrupt all these leftist organizations, these young millennials who are coming into consciousness about the economic situation, and put them into culture war
Hmm.
armies and have them police each other to the point where they have lost all sense of what like actual economic
Yes.
transformation is necessary and is demanded. Like in 2000, after 2008, 2009, I read everything I could about Wall Street, right? I'm just like
Hmm.
nerded out. I just like tried to school myself on all of this stuff. But you guys were coming to school, you were not reading everything about
Yeah.
like the financial education of what actually went down was the last thing on everyone's minds. There was almost a concerted effort to make identity and identitarianism the point of progressive contact. And to me, that's pure ideology at work. That is such a fucking amazing power play. And then if you
Yeah.
have a group that actually is going to agitate, like Occupy Wall Street, for some kind of financial reform, you send in your COINTELPRO disruptors and wreckers, and you start like pointing fingers at who is like not following the progressive stack or who has the most privilege, and then the group will just eat itself.
But what you're saying about the pressure of the peer group sounds a lot like Lash, who I mean I thought of a lot while reading the book. I don't think you cited him explicitly, but
He's
I mean,
my
but
husband. Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, what's interesting about him is that okay, you have a cadre of leftists in the school of Lash who recognize, this narcissistic form of politicking, the symbolic politicking, which again, like he called out as far back as, the 60s, the 70s. But at a certain point, you see like the left starts to deviate first from this focus on class, shifting towards identity, but also that kind of psychoanalytic awareness, that Freudian perspective, which was banished by the feminist establishment. So like you have this new left emerging that's focused on identity, but also that feeds off of these dysfunctional psychological complexes, again, like the narcissistic tendencies. They encourage this kind of, like the whole trauma thing with encouraging this fragility that like, oh, I can't deal with this because it triggers my mental health and I have to protect my peace, which ends up disempowering the proletariat, everyday people, and giving more power to like centralized bureaucratic kind of entities. Um, but I mean, I want to focus before like looking at the more psychological side of it. I want to look at the shift from class to identity. Because as you say, like there's elites, it's in the elites' interests to kind of co-opt progressive discourses in the way Oprah did and to make it more focused on my identity, my feelings, my trauma. How
Well,
did
also
this?
my story of success, because that's a really important part of this story is that
Yeah.
look what I did with my trauma.
Well, yeah.
I'm a media mogul.
But tell me more about like how you saw that come to be, this shift to myself, my success, my trauma, etc. over the class
Well,
interest.
there's a, you know, the consumer society became much more permeated every aspect of our lives through the
Hmm.
smartphone, right? And there used to be like you used to have to you could choose to make contact with different kinds of media, but let's say, but like with the newspaper, everyone read the same newspaper. There were only three channels. You don't remember this: ABC, CBS, NBC. We had like some kind of unified stream of information and text and spectacle that was that sort of kept the polity somewhat coherent. When the smartphone comes in, everyone gets their own algorithmically personalized news streams, news feeds, things like that. And so this idea of personal comfort comes out of something that's very, very deeply embedded in American 20th century consumerism, which is that some that you should feel good about yourself. And here's a product that's going to make you feel good about yourself. From the first kinds of like snake oil salesmen to, 1920s buy things on credit stuff, like your your home will become so much more comfortable if you have these appliances. You will be able to commute in comfort in the new Chevy Bel Air. That comfort becomes much more psychologized by you by the
Hmm.
time we get to social media and your generation. So everything is about like selling you this idea of optimized products for your consumption. So that's like the escalation of what Christopher Lasch saw in consumer society, which was already there, growing apace when he was writing the 50s and 60s. The thing that's interesting to me about him is once again like his rootedness in a kind of like almost autarchical or autonomous, like yeoman farmer American frontier idea of self-sufficiency. What he
Hmm.
saw in American culture as it became much more, suburban and
Yeah.
consumer product driven is that you had people who were dependent on these large networks of suppliers and producers for meaning in their lives. And Lash still was related to an agricultural frontier idea of self-sufficiency.
Yeah.
And you can be like, oh yeah, that was racist, that's white supremacist, that's what like the frontier was about. It was exploitative. But from the point of view of the West in its sort of syncretic relationship with Native American culture, but also like agricultural culture in the
Hmm.
South too, there were a lot of African American sharecroppers and farmers who were dependent on, all sorts of networks of supply chain and stuff like that, but they were much more self-sufficient in producing and reproducing what they needed on the farm. And this transition from an agricultural-based economy to an industrial and then post-industrial economy, Lash was a witness to, and he saw how people were slowly becoming more less skilled in every single aspect of life. Not just like you can't plant your own food, you can't. I'm not nostalgic for a peasantry because my family were peasants for 5,000 years. But there is this idea that and Lash really believed this, that when you're able to reproduce the means of your own subsistence, like you're more skeptical, you're more critical of what's happening in politics, and you're able to formulate your own points of view in this world. And I always think like he had this relationship to this world that you guys definitely have no relationship to.
No.
I had a relationship to it just because I saw my my family on the farm in China and my I saw my aunts go get water from the village
Mm.
well. You know, my grandmother had a courtyard garden where she raised rabbits and chickens and, planted some family vegetables because this was like this notion of self-sufficiency and deprivation were really great in families where you have like six, seven children and you can't really feed them unless you have some way of reproducing that stuff. One of the things I ask my students is, at the beginning of some classes on the culture industry, I go, look around you, look in your pockets. Do you have anything that's handmade?
Mm.
And so you look around, and some of them like have like jewelry that a friend made or something like that. But most of you are just using things that are industrially produced.
Yeah.
Industrially produced things, including ideas, sometimes are good. They're shortcuts to efficiency and convenience. But this whole consumer culture of time saving is saving for what? It's actually about de-skilling on the level of the cognitive,
Yeah.
on the highest levels of cognition to the point now where your generation really was so de-skilled that even your interpersonal relationships had to be mass produced for you. So like
Yeah.
Hinge, Bumble, what Grinder, Tinder, all of those things that match make for you guys actually used to have social functions where people had to, in the 18th century, go to dances and see the opposite sex. In the 19th century, walk the streets. In the 20th century, actually go to bars, see someone you like feel desire. Maybe go talk
Hmm.
to them, risk something. This, all of this stuff has been completely controlled by the algorithm, reproduced so that you feel like it's more convenient and less risky to just swipe through Grindr or Tinder or Bumble or whatever. And so Lash was seeing like the escalation of this kind of like emotional cognitive disability, you know, um, because you were
Hmm.
just being, all of these skills were taken away from you, so that what you actually have for him are people who are only able to perform narcissistically in large bureaucratic organizations.
Yeah.
Because it was like, you don't do anything. And he was like, these are non-productive organizations. They offer little tiny stages for the white collar worker to perform something about themselves. And when I first read that, a critique of bureaucracy and narcissism, I was like, wait a minute. Bureaucracy is so boring. Like, no narcissistic performer is going to go become a bureaucrat just to be able to have this chance to perform their goodness or their competence. But the more I worked in universities, the more I understood this. Like, I was still very naive when I read, I was like, oh my God, no. If you're a real narcissist, you go to Hollywood and you try to get, you try to get attention.
Yeah.
But actually, acting is a craft, and not everyone who's
Yeah.
beautiful or good looking can become a good actor. But what Lash's point was like, nothing matters in a bureaucracy except for the performance because there's no you're so far from productive life. And he was just very productivist, right?
Yeah.
So all you do is perform yourself. All you do is produce yourself. So you get on the company Zoom and you put all of your, pronouns on, and then, you're in these affinity groups and you're, performing the woman of color role.
Hmm.
And the bureaucracy gives you these roles so that you are no longer able to think for yourself at all.
Yeah. I mean, but that point doesn't show up in the book as much, but I know it's something that you do talk about often, concerning the dignity of work and like the loss of these skilled jobs, especially skilled working class, quote unquote, jobs. Because I don't know, I mean, this is of particular interest for me because again, as a millennial growing up with lots of bullshit jobs on offer, um, like it concerns me that I like the mainstream left, even DSA types, like more progressive leftists, don't really look at how big this problem is. First on like a political and economic scale, but to me it's also deeply important on, I would dare to say, a spiritual or cultural level because I mean, Marx may not have articulated it in these terms, but like work is something that, like skilled work, knowing how to do something, taking pride in your craft is something that gives dignity to you, even if you're on the lower rung socioeconomically speaking. It gives meaning to your life. And like coming from a Christian perspective, like if you look at so like the current Pope Leo, he draws a lot on Leo the 13th social doctrines. And you see that like, okay, obviously Leo the 13th had a lot of issues with Marx because, okay, dialectical materialism, whatever, but he found overlap insofar as, I don't know, like the fact that he backed labor unions as a means to preserve not just the workers' ownership over the means of production, but the fact that like having that expertise or having your expertise valued rather gives you this spiritual fulfillment. It gives you this sense of like I can create like God is creator. And I feel like I don't know, like that's why I wish more of like my peers who consider themselves to be progressive would read people like Lash because you would see like these are the real issues. Like this is what robs people of their dignity. It's not just the microaggressions and the trauma being triggered. Like it's these are real concrete things that give people's lives meaning and can empower them. But
Well, I
we've
was
lost that.
this is the for the next project, but um, I would I was reading the German ideology recently because of this conference we just did in Frankfurt for the launch of the Palm Springs School for Social Research. What is the social of socialism? And I
Hmm.
went back to like the early Marx, the German ideology, when he's really, so deeply obviously influenced by Romanticism and German idealism, but in the German ideology, he actually writes about how people move out of like the private sphere, the familial oikos, into the public world and the productive public world. And he says that participation in the public world is about producing things and about the labor of production within, like he talks about like the guild world and the
Hmm.
sort of late Middle Ages, that all of these skilled craftspeople had so much dignity
Yeah.
within their own. They understood where they were in the social world through their labor, through their productive labor. And when you look at how capitalism markets itself now to young people, you are valued based on your capacity to consume.
Hmm.
And this is the big difference between a Marxist idea of the polity and the social and a capitalist idea of the social. And so I've been really thinking about this. And the other thing that I really do believe when push comes to shove is that I think we have an anthropological human drive to
Hmm.
do things well.
Yeah.
When when that is taken away from us, we are helpless, we are angry, we are anxious. That in itself is like the deepest trauma for me
Hmm.
as a worker, right? If I can do something well and come up with the idea and execute it, I can come back to my life and have I can face anything. But if
Yeah.
I am at work and I'm just being told, like, I do this one motion, Marx talks about this in the factory where the human being is so attuned to the machine that there's only one motion that is used, like the human being is reduced to the arm.
Yeah.
Whereas the tailor would look at the whole piece of cloth and be able to
Mm.
sketch it out, cut it, and sew it. And he says, this is not efficient. A tailor needs 11 hours to make a coat. If it's on the assembly line, you can have 100 people and make 10 coats in a minute, or in an hour. It's
Hmm.
the rates of efficiency, in Marx's Critique of Capitalism are more important than the holistic idea of the worker as someone who conceives and executes. The
Yeah.
um the 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 piece of her contribution to the world, right? So I feel like with trauma culture and the trauma script, this all of this notion of this of skill and participation
Hmm.
is taken away from
Yeah.
the liberal subject who wants to now be just recognized for her suffering. And this is some weird evolution of feminism, second wave feminism, as it moved away from the concerns of socialist feminism,
Hmm.
which I show in the book really get eclipsed because of the crazy McCarthyism and anti-communism of
Yeah.
the 1950s. So then you have people like Gloria Steinem who are on CIA stipends making women's liberation all about representation and reproductive rights without any idea, without any concern for the majority of women who don't go to college, who are having children, who have to work, who have to manage their families, and whose lives are, are constrained by wage labor, bad housing, poor health
Yeah.
care. But then you have these like very attractive second wave feminists like Betty Friedan and Gloria Steinem saying that it's all about women's representation in the media.
Mm.
And it escalates more to a point of moral panic when the biggest issue in the 70s became sexual violence.
Yeah.
And sexual violence and raising awareness about sexual violence, like, just covers over wages,
Mm.
health care,
Yeah.
child care, and it becomes a way for neoliberal feminists to raise a shit ton of money for all of these different organizations that come out of the social movements and sort of metastasize in Hollywood as
Yeah.
not Hollywood, DC is different kinds of political NGO types. And it's very hard to talk about trauma. This is why I'm sort of talking around it a little bit, because I really actually believe in the importance of a boundary between public and private. And
Yes.
my deepest belief, oh, sorry,
No, go ahead.
can you see me? Oh, yeah, I just did something
Yeah.
with my screen. So, my deepest belief about the traumatic experience is that it needs a long time to be worked through. That one of the things
Mm.
about trauma is that it is a disturbance in our own narcissism. When something truly horrible happens to you, you feel that the boundary between you and the world is broken down. And this is what Freud talks about within Beyond the Pleasure Principle, about shell shock and everything else. And the reconstitution of that boundary often takes place as a defense against your own
Hmm.
unconscious fantasies about what that meant, but also as a defense against stimulation from the outside world. And that hardening of the boundary, like, oh, this is so triggering, I can't do this for my mental health, that actually creates more fixation on trauma as an isolating feature of psychological life. And the only way to undo our fixations about
Mm.
trauma is to look at the narcissistic participation. This is very abstract, but I'll just say it in the fantasy that arose when the subject was violated.
Mm. So, okay, but for me, there's a very clear connection between what you were just saying before about this problem of like people's agency, their self-sufficiency being crippled, and this, again, like, not just advertising my trauma, but using it as an excuse to like absolve myself of taking responsibility. And like, one of the most stark examples I can think of is when I was teaching, I think college sophomores. And what was the lesson? It was a philosophy class, but I was showing them a painting that involved like sexual abuse. And that's not even what I was trying to focus on. It was some other theme. But anyway, one of the girls in my class flipped a shit because she was like, "Oh my God, this is a depiction of like familial rape, of familial, incestuous sexual abuse. This is horrible. Like, why do people depict these things?" I was like, well, like art depicts all kinds of themes. She was like, yeah, but this is horrifying. Like, I don't understand why it's okay for family members to rape. And eventually she just kept going on and on. She was like, my father raped me as a girl. So like, I just don't understand how they normalize it. So then she stormed out and I was like, oh shit, I'm gonna get fired. She's gonna get me canceled. But then she comes back, she's fine. And at the end of class, I was like, "Hey, are you all right? I know that was a lot for you." And she's like, "You know what? my father did rape me when I was younger and it sucked. It was horrible. And sometimes, like, anything that makes me think of it, I freak out. But then, I cool off, I get over it. And I was like, are you like really? Like, are you sure? And she's like, yeah, like the world can't stop just because I went through a horrible experience. Like the world can't kind of catered to make me feel better. And I was like,
She
whoa.
worked it through. She worked it through.
But see what's shocking to me is like we don't encourage that kind of reaction. Like if she really continued flipping a shit and then got me fired for something I didn't even know I was doing wrong, like we would have applauded her. And I mean, obviously what's wrong here is first of all, it encourages this like this psychological fragility that like I can't go in the world without trigger warnings because I'm going to have a nervous breakdown, which it's crippling for you. Like you lose your agency and your ability to function. But also, again, like it cedes more power over to this kind of bureaucratic, centralized,
Yeah.
I don't know, like it gives more power to like the therapist to kind of dictate, like, I don't know. But the point is, yeah, like it's not empowering to
It
like
takes
tell young
away, it
people. Yeah.
absolutely takes away your agency to enter the trauma script
Yeah.
culture because you let the script do all the work for you.
But it becomes an excuse to enable these narcissistic tendencies. And like again, back to AOC, she presents herself, she puts on this show of how like she's very progressive, she's very concerned about the oppressed. Um, when in reality, I mean, again, as a millennial, I recognize one of my own. Like this is someone who's very much concerned about her career, her public image, her feelings. And like I think of someone like her, a millennial politician, compared to Alina Khan type, who is also a millennial, not born in the US. But like her orientation towards her position as a public figure, like I would argue is completely different because her priority is less my career, my feelings, putting on this show of being progressive, but like actually dealing with the needs of society and trying to address them concretely without the spectacle, without the fanfare. And I'm like, again, why is it that we applaud the AOC type as like she's a true progressive, whereas the Lena Khan was like actually a public servant? Nobody really talks about her. It's because she
Yeah, or
challenges
they
real
say
capitalist kind of, policy, but there's a
no,
lot.
and the other thing about Khan is like she's able to make arguments about irrefutable objective conditions. Like when she's busting a monopoly, she'll show you how the monopoly has raised prices, degraded services, created worse outcomes for everyone else. It takes a lot of reason, argument, and a participation in a shared reality
Hmm.
to follow those arguments, but also to make them, to do the research, to put yourself aside and do this work. This is why I want to call the book How the Personal Consume the Political. When you have AOC talking about her triggered memories of having been sexually assaulted during an IG live about the January 6th Capitol invasion, insurrection, whatever you want to call it. Her story consumes the
Yeah.
entire political situation. There's very little you can say or do to get out of this like feeling that overwhelms everyone. And it produces this kind of immunity against critique that,
Yeah.
she surrounds herself with. Of course, the right wing is like, oh my God, she's horrible. She just talks about herself all the time. There's that critique, but within the left itself, which is
Yeah.
where she's positioning herself, all these different um, criticisms of her get completely like erased from the public sphere because we're all supposed to be feeling empathy for her. And I, have talked about this in other contexts, but I think the PMC world, the white
Mhm.
collar liberal world, is really about setting up theaters of empathy.
Yeah.
I've been accused of not having empathy because like, how could you talk about trauma this way? Because I'm not performing, I'm not speaking the script of empathy.
Yeah.
It's in the PMC media sphere. Like, oh my God, I'm so sorry I see you. I don't know you that well, Stephen. We've just met on Zoom. I only know you by your thoughts and your words. And I judge you by that, by, the way you are in your world. If I get to know you better, then I could feel empathy for you. I would know who you are. We are traveling through history together. I'm so glad that there was something about what I wrote that sounded familiar to you. That creates a relationship between you
Yeah.
and me. But I can't just do insta empathy with you because I have never met you. I don't know your story. Everyone has a really amazing story. Every human being does. But it's not our role in every single situation to
Mm,
demand empathy from people. And I think that we've completely mistaken what the public sphere is and what personal interactions are.
yeah.
And I understand that position because I think as a very young person, I, suffered a lot. I mean, I was uh, in a lot of pain, and I thought if I can't get people to empathize with me, then they're my enemies, which is absolutely not true, actually. I had to learn to be someone who would be judged, and this is very Christian, I guess. So I wanted to be judged by my work, not by my
Mm,
suffering, by what I did with my suffering in my life. And
yeah.
when you're very young, you're like, oh my God, I want him to see me. But that is a very superficial sense of like
Yeah.
intersubjectivity, and it's coercive too on other people. Like, I want you to see me in this particular way. But the trauma
Mm,
script really offers that. You know, the whole thing about the Harvard Crimson article about how all of these Harvard students realized that for their personal essays, they produced a trauma story and they felt terrible for it, but it's what the personal statement is designed to do in
yeah.
college applications now. And therefore, to enter the world of higher education in America, you have to produce yourself as a victim. And
I
what
mean,
the
that's
fuck is that
the what's
about?
his name? Jason Arday is kind of a prime example. So, I mean,
Such
yeah,
a tragedy.
very
I
sad,
feel like the
but
self-objectification that he had to go through is something that he went through is something that every person of color is offered in higher education.
yeah.
Like tell us your story. Like, I went to Yale and I told my story, which was that both my grandmothers were illiterate to like
Mm,
countless feminist consciousness raising groups. What did that really make them feel? I got some little reward for it because all these white girls never been around someone who's, just from the other part of the world. They were like, oh my God, oh my God. Because, their mothers were like, waspy doyens who were about to give them or their grandmothers give them like giant trust funds. But that was like this performative stage where I could act out this thing. What the fuck does that mean? I mean, in my life, what I've seen is that all these promises of enlightenment and
mm,
liberalism, like coming out of giving people literacy, giving people, the means of bettering themselves through elite higher education, what that resulted in for a lot of people is just like getting horrible jobs on Wall Street so you could rape and pillage the American economy.
mm. But
Or
okay, let me play devil's advocate for a second because I mean, going back to Jason Arday, I mean, before, he took his life, I was reading some article where okay, so like I guess early last week he was exposed for fabricating blah 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 about himself. And he was quoted saying like he couldn't respond to the accusations because of he needed to protect his mental health, which sure sounds ridiculous. You can't take responsibility for your actions. But here's my devil's advocate. Like as a millennial who was trained, I was conditioned to think this way. Like I can't take responsibility because it is challenging for me. It's painful, it's hard. We weren't, in addition to being conditioned to think this way, like we were not given the tools to suck it up and deal with it and take responsibility, get the job done. Like no one taught me this.
Mm,
And as an adult now, like I know I have the responsibility to learn and figure it out. Like, yeah, it sucks that my teachers and my family did not teach me to lift myself up by my bootstraps, but now as an adult, I can do it. It's easier said than done. And I find that like there are
right, because you're
times,
rewarded for not doing
but
it.
not just that though, it's like the actual capacity. Like there are times where I really want to take a mental health day. And I know it's ridiculous. Like there's no such thing as a mental health day, but like sometimes I really don't feel like I have the stuff in me to pull through because again, I never learn. So like what do you say to millennials like me who were conditioned this way? We're not given the tools. We don't want to be little snowflakes. We don't want to be fragile, but like sometimes I just don't know how to pull it together. What do you say to us?
That's like very normal. That's very, very human. Um, I think I think that it all depends on the extremity of certain situations. But I have students who are like, oh my God, I forgot the deadline. Can I retake this? I'm so sorry, I just forgot. And what I say to them is, okay, out of a class of 50 people, 49 people remember the deadline. So is it really fair to them? I mean, I understand this is a terrible thing, but if you put this in a larger context, like you like your class, right? You like your peers, this is a good class. Like how how is this fair to them? The
Mm,
49 other people who have remembered. But the other thing that I think that is really important, and I don't know how this works out for everyone, but I that it's because you've all been raised in this very, very antisocial way where
mm,
your feelings can take precedence over the needs or the sort of social contract of a
yeah.
collective group. And
Mm,
I think that it's actually really healthy to be able to put your feelings, not let them overwhelm you, but put boundaries around it and say,
okay.
okay, I'm having a really hard time about this, but all of these people need me. And, or I'm in a social contract with all of these other people. So I kind of have to suck it up because I fucked up and I don't want to be treated like a special case in this class.
Mm,
And usually that's how I offer my sort of tough love situation.
yeah.
Of course, there are really extreme circumstances. If there's a death in the family, if you're really, really sick, just just being overwhelmed, I feel like, is not really an excuse or having, very, very tough days. We all have low morale at certain points, but it also has to do with the fact that maybe the work that you're doing doesn't feel very meaningful. Maybe you feel very
Yeah.
alienated from people at your job. Maybe you feel like it doesn't make any difference if you don't show up. And that's part of alienation at work.
Mm,
I know that a lot of there's so much absenteeism right after the pandemic. I don't know if this is still going on where millennial workers would
mm,
just call in sick and then then the entire ecosystem of oftentimes like a factory or low wage service position would be really impacted because everyone else gets impacted when there's absenteeism on a part of few people. I just feel like
yeah.
there's so little mutual obligation at work. You're
But
all
you
so
know,
alienated. And if you felt
mm,
more mutually connected to each other, that's the thing that keeps you going. Like rather than focusing on you, you think about like how your situation is shaping the situation of other people and other people are depending on you or it's a simple question of the social contract. Do you
mm,
really want to be the special case all the time? When
yeah.
I just tell them all the time, like, look, look at this class. I was like, well, if nine people forgot the deadline, then like maybe I would have to look at my assignment, but really it was just you. So, suck it.
Yeah.
You gotta go
And
on.
but so I mean, first of all, I was gonna say, you know what's worse than a millennial who needs to take a mental health day is a Zoomer, Gen Z, who
I'm too
just doesn't show up and doesn't even try to come up with an excuse. I mean, that's in general my experience. Like us millennials, like we're not diligent, but at least we make up excuses. Gen Z just doesn't do it, and they're like, "Oh, I didn't do it," and they're not going to ask for the extension. They're not going to be like, "Oops, my bad," which is kind of more noble in a way, because at least it's more honest. But they don't do
Um,
anything.
I don't know.
That's my experience.
Most of my I feel like the social contract is broken.
Yeah,
And so I don't,
complete.
that's the basis for like all of this behavior. That there's a sense of resignation, pessimism, um, lack of agency, actually, so that the excuse and the absenteeism becomes the only source of agency is just
Yeah.
refusal.
Yeah.
Refusal to
Mm.
participate becomes like the only way you can assert yourself.
Yeah.
And I would say that most of my students don't have the Zoomers, they don't have this. And this is where I do have compassion for them, but also fucking tough love,
Yeah.
is that the promises that the social hall makes them are so hollow. And
Mm.
so I give them this big lecture in class where I say, in this class, I show up every day prepared. Not all of the professors do. I do not dial it in. So let's just say for these 5 hours of a week, we're here for each other. That's why there's no I have no phone, no
Yeah.
laptop thing. I'm like, let's just
Okay.
be here for each other because it's like you just have to reconstitute certain aspects of
Yeah.
presence and
Mm.
mutual responsibility. And I don't know if I'm just like strengthening the last, pillars of a dying institution, but
Yeah.
I personally cannot if I'm supposed to teach a class, I do not fucking dial it in. And one
Yeah.
of the things that I realized that I felt so alienated from Jason R.J.'s story
Mm.
was his, kind of, I heard he was a very, very nice guy, but he would often not show up to class. There was
Yeah.
that he would come in late. That to me is like my nightmare. Like
Yeah.
I not being like I am responsible for this thing every
But
week.
yeah.
And
But
the idea that I would
mhm.
just not show up or come in late or come in unprepared just seems so foreign to me. And that is like part of the meaningfulness of work that I think is so important.
See, but see,
That
but
doesn't have to
that,
do with surveillance or
yeah.
someone like yelling at me. It's me yelling at me. Like, how could you fuck that up? All my anxiety nightmares are about me, like, going to be late for class and like I
Yeah.
missed this train or like I left my backpack somewhere. Those are like 95% of my
Mm.
nightmares.
But that goes back to this question though about like the dignity of work or whether our experience of work is meaningful. Like it reminds me when I used to teach high school and it was I genuinely enjoyed going there because there is a very communal feel to the school among faculty and students, faculty amongst each other. And I remember the
What's
day
the
that
school?
my
Where was
what
this?
sorry.
Where was the school? In
It
New
was
York?
in New Jersey. It was a Catholic school, inner city. But I remember the day my grandfather died, my like the dean of students called me and was like, "Look, you don't need to go. You can take a personal day. You don't need to come into work. I understand." And I was like, "You know what? I may not teach my classes, but I want to come to school today because I don't want to be alone and I want to be around people. Like I want to be in a place where I feel like I'm valued." So I
Hmm.
came and I just hung around. I talked to students, I talked to teachers, and like I don't know, like I see know how rare those types of workplaces
Oh yeah.
nowadays where like people one give a shit about what they do, like they see the
Yeah.
meaning in their work,
Yeah.
but also they care about their coworkers, they care about the people around them. So much so that like I rather go to work than sit at home on a mental health day.
Work is a deeply social place. I mean, this was
It
the
should
factory
be.
brought all the peasants together. I mean, you have to work to make it more social, but it's a place of association.
Yeah.
And yeah, it should and I feel like with all of this um AI stuff going on, it's just part of this managerial move to make work less meaningful, to make human beings feel more disposable, to make
Mm.
everyone feel more
Yeah.
desperate. So in some senses, like I understand the despair and I understand that being checked out um by young people because, I cannot tell you how much bullshit they have to put up with
Yeah.
in like their everyday lives at the university. Like half the stuff that comes at them from the administration, if it were my generation, there'd be like a massive rebellion. Like, no, we're not doing this. What the fuck is this new center? How come you're spending $7 million on this and taking
Yeah.
away our financial aid? Who built this building? But there's no sense of that agency anymore. It's just like accept
Yeah.
you got to
But
go along to get along.
But part of the reason why that school I was at had that communal vibe is because it was a private school where we didn't have to do all this bureaucratic bullshit like filing paper.
Hmm.
Like you were there to teach and to get to know the kids and to be part of an educational community. And that's it. Like if I had to do all this paperwork about, again, just utter bullshit, like I would not
Or
want to
you have
come
to do
into
like
work.
DEI training and then
Yeah.
like cyberbullying training and then like compliance, area compliance. I cannot tell you how many stupid
Yeah.
trainings I have to do that are generated by private equity owned
Yes.
companies. And
Exactly.
more of those trainings are generated by AI. So
Yeah.
like my major exposure to AI is diversity trainings right now.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
I
you
bet.
know, and whatever I choose to like expose myself to
Yeah.
with regard to social media and everything.
Well, so and before we wrap up, I want to go back to the AOC Lena Khan thing because on one hand, okay, like you have progressives who are like, oh yay, AOC, she's so great, she's championing, the oppressed, and then you have the conservatives like, oh, she's a dirty communist, which I think neither of which actually characterize what she's about. And then you have again the Lena Khan types who are hated by both liberals and conservatives, but also is applauded by certain brands of liberals and conservatives.
Right,
Like,
right.
you have her meeting with Bannon, meeting with Mamdani. Like she has this weird cross section of haters and fans. And anyway, I thought about this, like again, this potential for, kind of left-right coalition while reading your book because I have to say, there are certain points it made me think of. Do you know Abigail Shrier? She wrote this book.
Ooh, but I've heard that name
Abigail
before.
Shrier wrote a book with Sentinel Press about. It was about trauma, but I forget the title. But it's basically how like we're raising kids to be snowflakes, and like she
She's on the
distinguishes.
right, right? She's on the
Yeah,
right.
she's like a libertarian, right-wing kind of person. But her whole thing is like, yeah, like we're crippling the kids by teaching them, to be traumatized by everything and not to learn how to deal with suffering. And obviously, okay, different from you in the sense that she's right, libertarian. She doesn't have this class critique, this socioeconomic awareness that you have. But I'm just like, why? A lot of right-leaning people could read your book and get something out of it. Like, where is this dialogue? Like, sure, there's plenty of disagreement, but like, I just feel like a lot more could be accomplished if people who are disaffected with the kind of mainstream woke narrative on both the left and right could come together around certain like common sense bread and butter issues rather than playing into the culture war tropes like, oh, they're commies, oh, they're fascists. Like, again, that kind of culture war clash is in the interest of elites who want to maintain the status quo
Yeah,
rather than people
yeah.
coming together and getting something done, you
Yeah,
know?
I mean, I think it's a really, really important part of my project. I'm ready to be excoriated by parts of the liberal left who are, you know, identity fundamentalists, but I don't care anymore. I really think that there are ideological problems of domination, coercion, loss of agency in this country that we can speak to the right about as well. And part of the libertarian tradition has been this notion of agency and self-sufficiency. And I don't see that there's anything wrong with that. You know, they pride themselves on being nonconformist in some way, and the hyper-individualism, you know,
Mhm.
goes to a certain point where I'm just like, okay, you guys go build your own interstate highway system because some things the federal government did are really good, and you can't make an infrastructural change in this country without massive levels of cooperation. But but the idea, I still think this is really important. The idea of a kind of robust, skeptical, authentic person,
Mm.
a robustly individual, skeptical, active, agential person is so important to me. And I see the left liberal ideological grooming of young people as really just as oppressive as the kinds of ideological dogmatism on the right, this kind of like national security state and hyper-capitalist horror show we have on one side, but then this like demand for conformity and compli HR compliance on the left is
Yeah.
just as horrible. And my feeling about this kind of the sanctity of individual agency might be different from that of a libertarian, but I do feel like the only way you get to your individuality is
Mm.
through the collective. You can't be
Yeah.
fully alone, born fully formed in the head of Zeus, but you have to understand the ways in which you're shaped by history, by time, by
Mm.
culture, and you have to have some kind of humility about your place in the world. And understanding your place in the world is actually incredibly healing of trauma. When you
Mm.
understand and you accept your connectedness, either to a community, a class, a workplace, a family, that becomes like the basis of a kind of sociability upon which we can build socialism. Because right now we have
Mm.
all these anti-social forms of socialism that are hyper individualistic, but just use it as a kind of branding. And I think that it's very, very hard to find one's individual character.
Mhm.
And I just feel like there's so little room for that in the United States right
Yeah.
now. And if there's something about the working class that actually has that potential, it's because 65% of Americans who are not going to college, who are working class, don't get this kind of indoctrination. They have
Yeah.
hundreds of thousands of other problems, but let's make them the focus. The majority of people on earth are wage laborers, are worried
Yeah.
about putting bread and butter on the table. Let's think about getting the material conditions okay, abundantly a provision for those people,
Mm.
for the majority of people, before we start looking at, the sanctification
Yeah.
of individual success stories through trauma.
But
It's
you
a
think
big
it's possible, but do you think it's possible for the American people on the American left and right to come together around those more commonsensical issues?
I hope so. I
You
hope
hope.
so because I
All
think
right.
that's the only hope right now because so everything else is in a kind of stasis. And I think there are kind of signs of hope that younger politicians of your generation are
Hmm.
seeing that too. And the culture wars will go on and on as long as it serves the purposes of the elites. But I feel like there's less adhesion to them now. Like in 2010 or even
Mm.
2011, we wouldn't be able to have this conversation.
Yeah. No, that's true.
And so there's the ideology of leftism, commitment to this kind of identitarianism is weakening. I'm not saying it won't come back in some way,
Hmm.
but the other thing is I was just in Mexico City and there were all these young leftists there who were like, I'm sending your book to all my friends in La Paz and Bolivia because they really need it, the PMC critique. And I was like, what? And it turns out, that this kind of ideological the oppressive liberalism really has been one of the most successful soft power
Yeah.
exports of the US empire. And, um, in whatever way I can, as a small voice, to undo this hypnotic spell that US identitarianism and culture wars has had on the world, I'm going to fight that with everything I have because um, I think that solidarity cannot be built on these shifting sands, and the
Yeah.
and the weight of its oppressiveness and its
Mm.
reward and punishment um, cycles is not going away anytime soon. But as the empire weakens, its imperial notions are also looking very tarnished right now. And we
Mm.
can't just keep yelling like, oh, fascism, fascism, Trump is a fascist. We have to look at what kinds of power are being wielded and by whom in the world every day. And those crazy like Dems, they love a good war too.
Yeah.
They love an aggressive foreign policy.
Yeah. So, I mean, with that being said, I strongly recommend the book. I mean, for all the reasons you just mentioned, but also as I was saying, I do think my peers, millennials, who have been kind of crippled by the trauma ideology, but who want to, reclaim their agency, make something of their life. Like I found it helpful for precisely what you said, that it gives you that language. It gives you the tools to make sense. Okay, like what's going on here and what can I do about it? So
I
Catherine, thank you.
really
Yeah.
I want to thank you for bringing up this question of agency so much and putting
Yeah.
it front and center because it's not really the focus of the book, but I'm so glad that that was
Yeah.
what you got out of it, and that's what you made me talk about today a lot.
And I will use that as an opportunity to plug. I have a book in the works on this topic of agency. So that's not to come for over a year, but stay
Great.
tuned.
Oh, great. I will look forward to
Yes.
that.
So, but the Catherine, thank you so much for coming on and for the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So
Okay.
are we done?